Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Ranch Road with Van Hargis and Van Hargis Horsemanship. Let's get this sucker cranked up and head over there. I hope you guys are having a wonderful morning. So far, things here are just absolutely beautiful, and really appreciate the opportunity to get to do what we do every day, and to take this little short drive and share this with you guys, and appreciate you guys sharing it with us, of course. Today we're going to talk just briefly about an incident that took place yesterday at the ranch. It's when you do what we do for a living, things like this can happen. These are the types of things that I try to teach people to avoid, and try to avoid them at all costs. But we're working with some young colts, with some students, and one of the colts was being asked to canter out for the very first time that day. It's only cantered one other time, and yesterday we were going to canter it again. And keep in mind, he had the weekend off, and actually had a long weekend off. So he might have been a little bit fresh. So we asked our students to go ahead and to kind of trot out on him a little bit. And then eventually, after he was kind of warmed up and doing kind of well, then we challenged him to go ahead and canter. And right about the time he went to break into the canter, he got a little excited. And the excitement escalated, and before you know it, he was, I can't really call it bucking, but let's just say he was loping real rough. But he was excited. He was kind of bolting away, I guess you could say, and again, not with his head down, just going 9-0 away, but he was darn sure excited and worried. And the question is, what do you do when that situation comes up? And too many times, in my opinion, we are sometimes really good about being in the moment. Like in this particular case, that particular student was very much in the moment. She had asked her horse to move out. He was not really moving out as good as she really wanted him to, so she went to tap him on the butt with her bridle rein. And it's really good to be in the moment, but the question I have my students ask themselves all the time, before you ever ask, what do you want the answer to be? In other words, what is the correct answer before you ask the question? If you don't know the answer, don't ask the question. The second thing is, start thinking of probable answers. What might happen? What do you want to happen? And what might happen? And when I say that, I'm not telling you to go get worried and start panicking and start thinking about all the negative things that could happen in the future, but you do need to be prepared. For example, anytime I'm riding a younger colt, anytime, I always know that those babies can be unpredictable, because they're just learning. They have very few experiences to build on, so they're unpredictable. So when I'm getting ready to ask a colt to move out, and because I typically have my left hand on the reins more than any other, I will generally ask a horse to lope out with my left hand down the rein a little bit more. When I say that, though, I don't mean I'm going to have pressure put on the rein. As a matter of fact, I still try to have the reins fairly loose, but I have that rein adjusted to the point where if I need to pick up on that rein and help the horse overcome a moment, maybe if they're a little bit excited or get a little bit worried, maybe I can change their mind. Maybe I can remind them something of more familiar instead of that thing that's worrying them bad enough that they're getting upset. You see, because if you truly understand, I don't care what anybody tells you, if you truly understand why horses buck, you can narrow it down to two things. And really, both of these are very closely related. One is fear and the other is pain. And oftentimes the pain is just, it triggers the fear. So really, if you really want to get down and peel all the layers back, why do horses buck? Fear. Now, that's not to say that you can't inadvertently train a horse to buck, or that's not to say that your contract horses, in other words, your rodeo horses, that they don't buck. But see, they've been trained to buck in a way. They've never been trained not to buck. So bucking to them comes a little bit more natural to them, and it's never been taken away from them. In fact, they're encouraged to do it. But in your typical domestic horse, especially your colts, they only buck for one primary reason: fear. So let's look at yesterday's situation. We asked the horse to lope off. He got a little bit worried. He has been just a touch sore over his withers. We changed that saddle on that colt, but prior to that young girl riding him with that saddle, that previous saddle was a little bit sore on the withers. This is the first time that we've asked him to lope since we've changed saddles. Yet in that colt's mind, he might have anticipated a little bit of that soreness, or it might have been still a little bit sore, who knows. But for whatever reason, he got worried. You could tell by his head coming up, his ears go back. He just had that startled look about him. And because of that, things began to happen, things began to escalate. But in my opinion, the rider wasn't ready. She had the bridle reins way too loose. She was thinking, oh, he's just going to lope off. That's a great attitude, but you've also got to cover your bases on the what ifs. Now, I am probably no different than any of you. I do not ever want to get bucked off. I'm not a bronc rider, never have been a bronc rider, don't want to be a bronc rider. I'm a colt starter and a performance trainer. My job is to be in the saddle, not out of the saddle. The other thing is, and that's just for me, the other thing is from the horse's perspective, oftentimes when you get bucked off, you're up there flailing around and you're reaching and grabbing for leather. All the while, that triggers even more fear from the horse because suddenly you're doing things you've never done before. So what started off as a little bit fearful escalates very quickly into big fear. Plus, when you finally do get bucked off, yes, you could get hurt. You could get hurt really badly. The girl yesterday's pretty darn sore. She was sore yesterday afternoon, and I got a text from them this morning as they were getting things ready at the barn. She's very sore today, understandably so. But again, from the horse's perspective, oftentimes that human body coming out of nowhere and just landing on the ground, that startles them. Therefore, when you get back in the saddle, the horse now is even more worried. So there's nothing good about a colt bucking, and there's nothing good that can come out of it, in my opinion. However, what do you do to prevent it? Number one, preparation, preparation, preparation. Number two, sometimes horses are just going to get triggered into it. It doesn't have to be colts. It could be any horse get triggered into bucking for whatever reason. But if we do our job right and we're in the moment, but we're also thinking about things that could possibly happen, we can still be prepared. There's a key word there. But here's another thing. I'm going to end on this little quick analogy. And you guys have probably heard this. Well, that horse brushed me off on the fence, or that horse drags me underneath the tree. This may sound kind of callous, but my question is, well, how do you get to the tree? You see, we've named my podcast, and we've got a new secret coming up pretty quickly. We've named that program the same thing, which is Ride Every Stride. So let's say, in this case yesterday, colt gets a little excited. Head comes up. He starts getting a little bit speedier with his trot. Maybe you can feel his tail drop a little bit. Gets a little bit worried, and he's tucking his tail. And at what point do you think this is going to get better all by itself? It's not. The horses, we have worked to that point to get the horses to trust us and to look at us as being their leader. So at that point in time, and that head comes up and those ears come back to us, stand up and be a leader. If his first step was spooky and worried, his second step's probably going to be spooky and worried. His third step's going to be worse. And before you know it, it's going to escalate because nobody's telling him everything's okay. So what we have to do in that situation is when that horse begins to go off track, so to speak. In other words, that first step, that first stride is either too fast, too slow, to the right, to the left, someplace where it shouldn't be. In other words, it's not on the path in which we've picked and we've chosen. Then it's up to us to correct it. You see, there's so many times I've watched really experienced horse people prevent a wreck before it ever turns into a wreck because they're prepared. When that horse begins to buck and gets a little excited, pick him up and turn him one direction or the other. Remind him of a better and safer place. Remind him that you're there. Remind him that you're supporting him. But if you just kind of ride through it, or you do the worst thing you can do is panic and you go to reaching for leather but not reaching for those reins or not doing something to change the scenario, it's usually going to work out pretty bad. So ride every stride. Ride every stride. You know, again, how did that horse rub you off on the tree? My question is, how did he get to the tree? You know, at what point did you realize he was headed that direction where you didn't want him to go before you corrected it? Yesterday's situation didn't involve a tree. We were just riding around in one of the arenas. But the colt got a little bit worried, and the rider didn't do enough, in my opinion, to redirect that energy. So the hind end stayed engaged. Hind end pushed his front end forward and kind of ran off. At the very last, the horse zigged and the rider zagged. Both of them went different directions. The rider ended up on the ground. Today, the rider's sore. Colt's fine. Anyway, Ride Every Stride. Hope you guys enjoyed today's little session. And if you have any questions or comments about it, or you want to share some of your experiences with horses doing things for all of a sudden and for no reason, or whatever the case may be. Or if you'd like to discuss more about what triggers horses to sometimes get a little bit worried and maybe even break into a buck, call us. Not call us, but text us, email us, get in contact with us, messenger us. Let us know. We'd like to hear those comments. Thank you guys for joining me on the Ranch Road. And until next time, this is Van Hargis with Van Hargis Horsemanship.